Venezuela's president addresses the nation and reflects on the many challenges and triumphs of his government. General Khalifa Haftar has abandoned talks on a ceasefire in Libya. And the government of Argentina restarts a price control program to help those affected by the economic crisis. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has given a report to the nation about the first day of his second term in office. During his speech, Maduro touched on the many challenges and victories of the past year, but above all, he highlighted the unbreakable spirit of the Venezuelan people.
Truly, Venezuela's popular heroism shone brightest during a year when the empire further closed down the fence around us. The state of exception it has imposed on our homeland. They hurt us last year. The economic war only got worse as the empire continues to tie our hands and feet. But as difficult and complex as 2019 was, it was also a year when we had many victories against imperial aggressions by the United States. It was a year when we showed ourselves and the entire world our unbreakable will to win at all costs. In Washington, they thought that everything was ready for the final blow. 2019 was going to mark the end of the Bolivarian Revolution. But their final blow, their attempts at defeating us, all failed miserably. A complete failure for the empire and its lackeys.
President Maduro also referred to the various coup attempts led by the opposition and in particular by lawmaker Juan Guaido.
What the self-proclaimed show revealed, once again, is that the opposition does not have any policies of their own, that they lack direction in all national matters because they do not have any patriotism or any feeling of love for their nation. And I need to digress for a moment, because we use the term opposition with complete generosity, because what we are facing against is an increasingly fractured group who defend anti-national interests and are in open war against us. On April 30th, they went back to their old ways. That day, they attempted a military coup, but were merely able to convince a handful of traitors to join them. That coup attempt happened in a vacuum, as it had no support from the military, and much less from our people. It was a massive failure by the far right and their pro-Yankee interests. On April 30th, we saw how small their numbers are, and we were able to get rid of the small group of traitors operating inside the armed forces. But more than anything, we clearly saw the unbreakable morals of our Bolivarian armed forces, their absolute discipline and unity.
Even though international and national opponents of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro predicted he would only be in power for a few months after being re-elected in 2018, as 2019 ended, they had to acknowledge their wrong predictions and recognize the strengths of the Bolivarian project.
He was able to reinforce his strength on a national and international level, despite ongoing sabotage and economic blockade headed by the United States, who had a dominant role in the rise of Juan Guaido. But at the end of the day, President Maduro, through peace and diplomacy, was able to consolidate the necessary clout and international support to stay in power.
2019 was a raw year for Venezuela. The first 6 months were especially difficult, as the government focused mainly on guaranteeing political stability and the sovereignty of the nation. Now, after Guaido's fall and the split within the opposition, the government can focus a bit more on the economic problems and improving public policies, especially on the issues of inflation.
On an internal level, the biggest issue is the economic situation that the people have to face, a main consequence of economic sanctions and the economic blockade. The government plans can reverse the situation, but a social protection system keeps them in check.
The problems of the community, cultural, sports, medical development. If people got sick, they had to find a hospital. But since the revolution, we have a local doctor. You can find them at any time. because they live in the neighborhood. The government's help means a lot in the communities.
The key of victory in 2019 was the resistance of community-based organizations. A dense social structure keeps supporting President Maduro, and they are willing to stand against the economic problems and the political conflicts. Corporate media ignore this network, and the right wing always fails to reach them, either due to a lack of interest or capacity.
In the Fourth Republic, we didn't have political awareness. In fact, we didn't even participate on political issues, because that was for rich people. Once Commander Chavez came and said he was going to lead our country towards a better future, where the people can participate and take over their own destiny, that is when we started to have political awareness and to work for the poor, which are our people.
In 2020, Maduro has a bigger range of action, hoping to resolve issues like oil production, controlling hyperinflation, strengthening alliances and international investments, and modernizing the state, among others.
The government has to make plans under an international blockade, which is very difficult and not something many nations deal with. Nonetheless, they are focusing on economic matters and on public services, which are the two things that mainly affect the Venezuelan people.
Our President Nicolas Maduro, despite all the difficult situations, has trusted in the people and the people have trusted him. And the world has to see the decision of the people. The countries have to see that what we are doing is our decision. This is the process we want to work on.
2020 begins with infighting in the National Assembly and economic up and downs. But the Venezuelan people has spent 20 years showing their resistance against all attacks.
Moving to Colombia, Henry Acosta, a former negotiator who mediated talks between the government and the FARC before the peace agreement was signed in 2016, has warned that the armed conflict could restart in 2020 if the government continues to fail to implement the accords.
It's a big risk because the dissidents have said that there won't be pitched battles but rather urban warfare, that there won't be prolonged war but a short war. Well, if there are no battles, there will be bombings in urban areas until the state calls a constituent assembly, and that constituent assembly determines that 100% of the final agreement must be implemented, and that constituent assembly determines that this country must become socialist.
Haiti's president could be ruling by decree before the end of the week, as the mandates of lower house and most senators have formally ended. This latest crisis comes as the country failed to hold legislative elections last October. Protests have been ongoing as a result. But President Jovenel Moïse has blamed the parliament for failing to approve an electoral law he claimed was required to hold elections. On the other hand, his opponents accuse him of trying to take control of the country's political system.
We are going to have reforms over the coming 2 years. But regarding the elections, I insist, will they be in 6 or 8 months? Yes, we could have elections in 2020. It's not a promise, but it's what the president wants given the agreement that we are discussing, to organize credible, honest, and democratic elections this year to have a new political body, because democracy has lost a very important branch, which is the legislative power.
Libya's Khalifa Haftar has abandoned ceasefire talks in Moscow that had hoped to end 9 months of heavy fighting in the war-torn nation. Haftar's abrupt departure early on Tuesday is a setback to the diplomatic push by the international community, in particular Russia and Turkey, who were brokering these talks. The commander of the Libyan National Army arrived in Moscow on Monday for talks with the UN-recognized government, headed by Faiz al-Sarraj and based in Tripoli. Regardless, Moscow has assured they would continue their efforts to see an end to the Libyan conflict.
As you know, during the visit of President Vladimir Putin to Istanbul on the 8th of January, Russia and Turkey put forward an initiative for a ceasefire in Libya. To develop this initiative, Libyan representatives met yesterday in Moscow along with ministers of defense and foreign affairs of Russia and Turkey. We will continue efforts in this direction. So far, we have not achieved the final result. Nobody can be satisfied with the situation in the Gulf region, as tension is still being built up. I even could say uncertainty is rising, and it is already influencing actions, and people are dying because of that.
And the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said he would teach a lesson to Field Marshal Haftar if he resumes fighting in Libya.
We will not hesitate to teach a deserved lesson to coup leader Haftar if he continues his attacks on the country's legitimate administration and our brothers in Libya.
Now, the fragile ceasefire between the UN-backed government of national accord and the Libyan National Army has left citizens divided. Some residents living in areas that have been attacked by Islamic State militias since 2011 have faith that Khalifa Haftar's forces will liberate them, even without the deal. On the other hand, families who have been displaced by the fighting in Tripoli remain supportive of the peace agreement. Libya has been locked in a brutal civil war since the US-backed ousting of former leader Muammar Gaddafi 9 years ago.
We support a decision of ceasefire. In fact, it will be all sides a chance to sit down and talk with each other to stop the war. We support stability and security.
Most of us in Ceuta support the ceasefire because we have shed too much blood and lost too many lives. Any good Libyan will not accept any more bloodshed from either sides. Ceasefire is a wise decision.
We'll take a short break now. When we come back, a law in Trinidad has been ruled unconstitutional. Stay with us to find out what's next. Welcome back. In Bolivia, conservative sectors and the de facto government are boycotting a human rights compliance law approved by the Senate and backed by the United Nations.
Bolivia's de facto government, under legislative minority, are boycotting the approval of a law that is part of the peace accords agreed upon in November of last year, which had the participation of a UN expert.
I didn't have a report from the Constitutional Commission, which I preside, and the deadlines were not complied with in order to have a direct debate by the senators.
This draft bill ratifies everyone's human rights, but it was proposed after the rights of former government officials, diplomats, and citizens were violated. Those who boycott the accord and the law's approval admit that the law itself is nothing important.
This is an unnecessary law, because the guarantees are already established in the Constitution. The Constitution specifies guarantees that all Bolivian citizens have.
However, attacks continue against the draft bill, to the point that it has been called an immunity law, or even worse, an impunity law.
No article has the name impunity law. The Legislative Assembly is not going to cover up any crime. What we want is the guarantee of a full compliance with human rights for all Bolivians.
In the face of a smear campaign against the proposed law, the UN Special Envoy and expert in peace process has defended. This is about political rights, human rights. Due to process, there should be topics under which an agreement can be reached. I think there should be depolarization of the topic, and it should be seen from the perspective of universal rights. The draft bill, which the de facto president says she won't pass, prohibits several actions, including arbitrary preventive detentions and judicial harassment. It also guarantees freedom of expression in media and defines reparations for the family members of the 34 people who were murdered during anti-coup protests.
In some Caribbean news, starting in Trinidad and Tobago, a High Court judge has ruled that Sections 3 and 4 of the Sedition Act are unconstitutional. The law was challenged by a religious figure who was being investigated for the use of hate speech. The Attorney General has since announced that the government intends to challenge the judgment.
I've instructed the state's attorneys to take an urgent and immediate appeal and to ask for an expedited hearing at the Court of Appeal for this particular matter, because of the precedent that it will set on every saved law that applies in this country, be it the law that allows capital punishment to be punished by death by hanging, or be it the law that protects secrecy provisions in the Inland Revenue Act.
Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness says his government will fight crime using the law. This as he advised some fed-up citizens that the criminal element won't be taken out by police.
We can't go back to the point where we have very high police killings. We are going to fight crime using the law. We have been fighting crime using the other methods, extrajudicial and illegal, for many years, and here we are still today. So let us use the law. If it means we have to strengthen the law, if it means we have to bring in more technology, and it definitely means that we have to bring in the public, you, into the crime-fighting solution.
Staying in the region, some islands are experiencing tropical storm-strength winds that have knocked down trees and blown off roofs. According to the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service, the twin island withstood 38 kilometers per hour winds. Dominica resisted 77.8 kilometer per hour strength gusts. Barbados, St. Lucia and Antigua 55.6 kilometer per hour blasts. There have been no reported injuries or deaths thus far. Dominican Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett has started the ball rolling following his recent election victory, announcing plans to further develop the capital, Roseau, some of which includes making the city hurricane ready.
That in the design of the road enhancement, we have provided for underground ducts where those lines can be placed. And of course, enhancing the resilience of our city. In the event of a hurricane, we don't have any poles to fall on our homes and our properties. And if we have a problem of transmission of energy to the city, we can simply put up a generator or even our solar panels and have our lights in the city.
Guatemala's new president, Alejandro Giammattei, took office on Tuesday as he will rule the country until 2024. Giammattei was the former director of the nation's prison system. During the presidential campaign, he stood out as a far-right politician who vowed to bring back the death penalty as a solution to high insecurity. As president, he faces the task of solving high levels of poverty and unemployment. The president will also have to deal with pressure from the U.S. on security and immigration, as President Donald Trump wants to reduce asylum applications from Central America. Meanwhile, civil society groups in Guatemala are pressuring authorities to arrest outgoing President Jimmy Morales, who is accused of illegal campaign financing. Morales also faces criticism for shutting down the UN-backed International Commission Against Impunity, which had been investigating him and members of his family on several accusations, including drug trafficking. The government of Argentina has restarted a price control program so that citizens can have access to food and hygienic products at accessible prices.
The government, as part of its continued fight against hunger, has restarted a program to control prices, while also expanding the number of products available to 310.
Both the state and private companies understand this is a program to promote spending, which will help the business sector just as much as everyday citizens.
The products selected will not be allowed to run out, and their pricing will be a reference to other similar products.
The price control program will be in effect for 1 year and applies to the 310 selected products. That means they cannot be removed from the program and their price will be updated every 3 months because they must also consider the rate of inflation. And while inflation is decreasing, it is not healthy for the economy to completely freeze a price point.
Experts have made comparison with a program that was launched in 2014 and was continued by President Mauricio Macri, but with changes that did not answer to the needs of the citizens.
From 20 to 15, they started changing the product, the brands. They replaced them with products that were not part of Argentinian daily needs. What they are doing now is trying to restart the previous program with products which people know and use.
In order for the price control to work, this must be accompanied by a law that promotes equal participation between well-known brands and products made by smaller businesses, including organic and family-run companies. Such a law is already halfway through Congress.
When you buy a product that has a price that's under control, it serves as an anchor so that other prices stay level.
The price control system will also include a phone app that can show the location of stores providing products under this system.
After the break, a look at China-Africa relations. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. China has once again pledged to strengthen its bilateral relations with African countries following a successful week-long visit by Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The Asian giant has played a huge role in the continent by helping nations such as Zimbabwe, which have been affected by sanctions imposed by the United States and its European counterparts. Yi has backed calls to lift the blockades, saying they have no basis under international law. His African tour, which began on Tuesday, has taken him to Egypt, Djibouti, Eritrea, Burundi, and Zimbabwe.
Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Africa marks the 30th consecutive year that China's Foreign Minister has made Africa his first overseas trip every year. This unique gesture of the Chinese Foreign Minister fully reflects that China and Africa have special feelings of friendship by sharing weal and woe for generations. It also shows that developing friendly and cooperative relations with African countries has always been China's consistent basic policy, an unswerving strategic choice in foreign affairs. In the past, in the present, and in the future, no matter how the international landscape changes or what others say, the profound friendship between China and Africa remain and will remain unbreakable, and China will always stand firmly with all African brothers.
Iran has arrested an unspecified number of people in connection with the Ukrainian Airlines plane crash that occurred last Wednesday. The judiciary issued a statement which said that some individuals were detained over the past 3 days after extensive investigations. The passenger jet was mistakenly targeted by Iranian forces just after takeoff from Tehran, killing all 176 people on board. And Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has spoken about the plane crash, saying it was an unforgivable mistake and assured that those responsible will be punished.
Immediately after it was made clear to me that the crash was because of a very painful and unforgivable mistake, I immediately instructed those responsible to make the information public. This incident is extremely bitter, and it is extremely hard for people to accept what happened. Even if the aircraft had crashed because of technical problems, it still would have been very hard to take. But after it was confirmed that it was a human error, it compounded public sorrow many times over.
And we end with news that anti-government protests in Lebanon have resumed once again. Protesters say they are back on the streets due to the government's inaction and to demand the entire political class step down. Students also blocked roads around Beirut and other cities. Nationwide protests against government mismanagement and corruption started in October of last year and led to the resignation of the former PM. With that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thanks for watching.